What is natural selection?
Put simply, natural selection is a mechanism of evolution.
In natural selection, those organisms that are better suited to the environmental factors will therefore be more likely to survive and reproduce.
Or in other words, natural selection favors the organisms with greater fitness.
There are 3 types of natural selection we will go over: stabilizing, directional, and disruptive.
These 3 types can be seen in graphs that demonstrate the data of frequency of phenotypes in correlation to whether or not natural selection has occurred.
When looking at these graphs, it's important to remember that the black line represents the frequency of a phenotype prior to natural selection occurring, while the red line represents the after.
Okay, so let's start off with stabilizing. Stabilizing selection is when individuals with more moderate and intermediate phenotypes are more likely to survive and reproduce as opposed to more extreme variants.
Let's take a look at plants for an example. On one extreme end, let's consider a plant that's phenotype results in it being short. In the middle, we have a plant of the same species that phenotype results in it having an average height. On the remaining extreme end is the plant with the phenotype for tall height.
However, in these plants' shared environment, they do not all have the same fitness due to their variation in heights. The short plant is too far away from the sun, meaning that many of the taller trees can block sunlight from it, resulting in it slowly dying as its leaves start to become brown.
The really tall plant, on the other hand, is able to get direct sunlight. However, it's much more susceptible to wind damage.
The plant with the phenotype giving it an average height, on the other hand, is able to avoid wind damage while also being tall enough that it's able to get some direct sunlight. Therefore, the phenotypes of being too tall and too short are selected against, making their phenotype frequency decrease.
Next, we can move on to directional selection. In this type, the highest frequency is seen in the graph to move from one phenotype to the other. This is a result of one extreme of the trait distribution experiencing selection against it, creating a shift towards the other extreme.
For this example, we can use giraffes. Giraffes with shorter necks were selected against as their necks were too short to reach taller plants and trees, and therefore they were unable to gain as many leaves for food. Giraffes with long necks, however, were able to reach these leaves and therefore were more likely to survive and reproduce, and therefore the distribution of necklines shifted to favor those with longer necks.
Lastly, we will cover disruptive selection. This is when natural selection works against the individuals in the middle of the trait distribution, resulting in 2 extreme traits to instead to be more greatly favored. This can be demonstrated when looking at moths with 3 different phenotypes being demonstrated for color. One extreme is that some moths are white. Other moths show incomplete dominance and are gray. And the other extreme is the moths being black. Let's say that this species of moths are living in an area that is extremely cold and has some industrialized regions.
The white moths are able to hide from predators through camouflaging with the areas with snowy landscape. The black moths are able to blend in with the smoke in the more industrialized regions, thus also gaining camouflage. On the other hand, the gray moths aren't able to as effectively blend in with either environment, resulting in this intermediate phenotype frequency to greatly decrease, while the other 2 can increase. But what about a situation when the frequency of phenotypes stay the same? This is what we call Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium.
Wait, what is Hardy-Weinberg?
Well, there must be 5 principles to keep a population in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. Having a large population, no migration or gene flow, no mutations, no natural selection, and no sexual selection.
Let's take a look at the large population principle. In this case, there are millions of mice. This condition is needed so that the mice can combat the impact of genetic drift.
Next, no migration or gene flow. The glow-in-the-dark mice and the normal mice cannot cross plants in order to maintain the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. Migration can change the gene frequency by bringing in more copies of an allele already in the population or bringing in new alleles that are from a mutation.
Talking about mutations, there can be no mutations in order to maintain the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. The female and male mice give birth to a mutated baby mouse. Mutations disrupt the equilibrium of allele frequencies by introducing new alleles into a population. Therefore, to maintain the equilibrium, it is best for the male and female mice to give birth to a normal mouse.
Next, there shouldn't be any natural selection in a population for them to be in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. At nighttime, the glow-in-the-dark mice are more susceptible to be seen by the purple monster, while the normal mice can camouflage better. Natural selection favors the normal mice over the glow-in-the-dark mice. However, in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, the genetic variation of the population must stay stable throughout generations. Therefore, instead of the normal mice being favored, both mice types should be equally likely to not be eaten by the purple monster in order for equilibrium to be maintained.
Lastly, there should not be any sexual selection in a population. The female mouse is looking for a mate and finds a mouse with a big heart and a normal mouse. The female mouse prefers the mouse with the bigger heart, and she decides to mate with the mouse with the heart. This disrupts the equilibrium because non-random mating won't make allele frequencies in the population change itself. So, to maintain the equilibrium, the mouse doesn't find any of the two mice interesting and decides to mate another time.
The Hardy-Weinberg equation states that the frequency at which a specific genotype occurs can be expressed as a ratio of the genotype in question to the total number of alleles in the population. There are two equations, the first one being P plus Q equals 1, where P represents the dominant allele and Q equals the recessive allele.
The second equation is P squared plus 2PQ plus Q squared, where P squared represents the frequency of the homozygous dominant genotype, and where Q squared represents the frequency of the homozygous recessive genotype, and lastly where 2PQ represents the frequency of the heterozygous genotype. Thank you
For watching.